everyone. This is the Board Natural and Cultural Resources Committee meeting of the East Bay Regional Parks District on June 10th, beginning at 12:36 p.m. Director Lane, would you like me to take roll call?
Yes, please.
Chair Lane.
Here.
Director Coffey.
Here.
Director Eccles.
Here.
AGM Kelchner.
Here.
Additional staff on the call today: Chief of Stewardship Matt Grawl, Chief of Planning Brian Holt, Chief of Interpretive and Recreation Services Ann Kassabaum, Environmental Services Manager Becky Tuden, IPM Specialist Pam Bites, and Principal Planner Devon Reef.
All right, thank you. We are meeting today on a Zoom technology, and our board meeting is being held in accordance with Governor Newsom's executive order allowing for board members to participate in standing committee meetings remotely. We're also providing live audio and video streaming and have provided for the public the opportunity to email or call in prior to the meeting. All information regarding participation in this meeting can be found on the agenda on the district website, which is ebparks.org. Today, after each presentation, and we have 3 of them, we'll be taking the public comment through the Zoom platform. So if a member of the public would like to speak on an item on the agenda, raise your hand and the committee secretary will record your information and you will be recognized to speak during the comment period for that item. Do any of the committee members have any questions about the procedures today? Seeing none, we'll begin the agenda. And what we have done is we have put our first agenda item as the reorganization of the Cultural Services Coordinator. And I think Christina Kelchner will introduce it with the staff report provided by Brian Holt. Christina?
Thank you, Director Lane. Christina Kelchner, AGM of Acquisition Stewardship and Development. We're very excited to bring this item to you today. This is the Cultural Services Coordinator position, a very important position at the Park District, and our ongoing work to collaborate with the tribes and continue to build our relationships with tribal communities. This is a key position for that work. And we are all missing Beverly Ortiz, who previously had filled this requirement and retired, I believe, late last year. So since Bev's retirement, we have been looking at the position and considering how to best make the best use of that position so that it's most effective within the district. And so we have a reorganization just of where the placement of that position is and what all of that position will be doing, and that Brian's going to present for us. These recommendations are based on Bev Ortiz's recommendations. This was her wish before she left, how she thought the position could be best used. And also just wanted to share that we are in conversation with AFSCME about this reorganization, and have given them all the information a few times, and those conversations are ongoing. And that we do hope to bring this as a mid-year budget item to the full board. So this is just informational to this committee today. With that, I'll hand it over to Brian to make the presentation.
Thank you very much. And just confirm that everybody can hear me all right. All right, very good. Thank you, Christina. I'm Brian Holt, Chief of Planning and GIS. And I will mention Ann Kassabaum, who is the current supervisor for this position, is here with us as well. So she can provide any input from her side as well as questions come up. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick. We've got a short presentation for you, and we'll go from there. So, all right. So the Cultural Services Coordinator position, this is a position that was originally established in 2013. It was located and established within the Operations Division in the Interpretive and Recreation Services Department. The inaugural incumbent, Dr. Bev Ortiz, so she has been the only person who has served in that position. And you can see Bev here out on a site visit, I believe to Black Diamond Mines, recently retired in December. So, so with that, we've had discussions throughout the years, but now with her retirement, moving forward with the recommendation to reorganize the position from operations to acquisition, stewardship, and development within the planning and GIS department. So the position was originally established within the operations department. And as I understand it, and Anne may have some additional input, but from Assistant General Manager Jim O'Connor and others, the first duty for this position was to really develop an inventory of the cultural and historic sites throughout the park district. So this required a lot of close coordination with the park supervisors and working in the field to develop that. A cultural atlas was developed, working with our GIS department to actually digitize that atlas. And Beverly created a library of the cultural reports and all that sort of materials, so that we have the information available. So that was really the initial focus, was working closely with operations staff to develop that information. Dr. Ortiz also worked closely with operations to develop some, training programs about field finds and how to manage cultural sites, and to continue some of the oral history and archive programs that were within the operations department. So since 2013, the position has increasingly worked with the planning and GIS department, both, as I mentioned, working with the GIS department, actually developing the cultural atlas, and as you're familiar, to develop the Native peoples interpretive materials that we can see an image of on the right. And work closely with the planning department as we're developing land use plans, engaging in tribal consultation, conducting historic and cultural resource evaluations, and as we're working through the various federal and state laws like Section 106 and AB 52. As our planning staff works through those on our plans, we work closely with the cultural services coordinator. So as we went in and looked at the job description, the job classification and duties, Bev was really, frankly, doing 3 jobs, and had a huge workload where her position falls within 3 primary buckets, where she was working with interpretation and interpretive staff, and developing interpretive materials and guiding the programs that are done in the field, working with archives and those materials, and then, as I mentioned, working with planning as we work through the CEQA process and tribal consultation issues. We took a look at this, and of course the interpretation program will continue, and this position will continue to support interpretation, and we look forward to working closely with Anne and her team to continue to be a subject matter expert in that area. The archives program, we looked at some of those functions that may go over to, I'm not sure if it's finalized, but a recently created archive supervisor position that can focus more in on the archives. So some of those materials may go there, but of course we'll continue working closely with them on the oral histories and archive management, and then continuing to work in the planning and GIS tasks. So this is where we're at on the current proposal for the org chart. You can see on the left here, this is a position that, as currently proposed, would report directly to the chief. This would allow closer coordination between the ASD division as we actually plan and develop projects that we're getting that early input from the cultural services coordinator, and able to engage in earlier and more effective consultation with Native peoples. A big part of this position has been and will continue to be to develop and maintain good relationships with Native peoples, and just to ensure consistency with between our district's historic and cultural preservation goals and our park planning and development activities. So with that, as Christina mentioned, this is an informational item only. We have sent the reorganization materials to AFSCME for their consideration, looking to move through the personnel allocation as part of the mid-year budget, and this will ultimately come to the board for board approval. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or discuss the committee's interest in this position, and I'm going to try to stop sharing my screen, and I'll bring it back over here.
All right. To begin, are there any questions from the committee for staff about this position?
Not me. It sounds like a reasonable approach.
Okay, Elizabeth?
I agree. Yeah, I don't have any questions. It definitely looks like a good way to go.
Are we going to alter the job description itself in any way, or it's a movement of this position to a different location?
Minimally, we've gone to look at the job description with HR to basically move those functions that were in the job description that would be, I guess, duplicative or redundant with the newly created archives manager position. So for those job functions that were traditionally all within the cultural services coordinator, those things that would move over and become part of the archives position. So that's the primary focus, and part of the reason for making this change was really looking at the job classification, and a lot of it was written very much about working with planning and developing land use plans and other materials. So that's been really the primary focus there, and I see Ann Castlebaum has some comments as well. So.
If you remember, Ann Castlebaum, Chief of Interpretive and Recreation Services, we'd had a class and compensation study that was done with all AFSCME positions. And so prior to Bev's retirement, she went through the job description and made her recommendations, as I did, and we went through that process recently.
Okay, all right.
On the job description.
Okay, thank you for reminding us about that. Okay, I'll have some other comments, but I think we have somebody who'd like to make a public comment. Is that true?
We do. We have one member of the public, Amelia Marshall.
Okay, I'll have some other comments, but I think we have somebody who'd like to make a public comment.
Hi there. The technology
Is that
is a
true?
bit squirrely here today. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, I'll have some other comments, but I think we have somebody who'd like to make a public comment.
Hi there. The technology is a bit squirrely here today. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, I'll have some other comments. Just
Hi,
a minute.
Miss Marshall, if you could turn down your YouTube volume, please.
Things going on here. So what needs to happen? Amelia, do you have your YouTube on? Okay, so if we're going to hear from Amelia, you need to unmute yourself. Amelia, we can't hear you. Amelia? Okay, so if we're going to hear from Amelia, you need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Amelia, we can't hear you.
Okay, I'll try unmuting again. Okay.
Amelia? Okay, so if
Can you
we're going to
hear me
hear from Amelia, you need to unmute yourself.
now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes. No. No.
Can you hear me now?
So if we're going to hear from Amelia, you need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Miss Marshall, the issue I think is that you have your volume on your YouTube stream up, so we're getting that volume.
Okay, I'll try to show it. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me
Miss Marshall, the issue I think is that you have
I'm
your
trying
volume on
to.
your YouTube stream up, so we're getting that volume.
Okay, here we go. I'll try to kill that.
Miss
hear me
Marshall,
now?
the issue I think is that you have
I'm
your
trying
volume on
to.
your YouTube stream up, so we're getting that volume.
I'm aware of that. All right. Can you hear me now? Can you
Yeah.
hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Don't we love technology when it works?
Yeah.
I'm here today as an 8-year archives volunteer and local history author and a great enthusiast for the oral history program. I'd like to speak about my passion for and hopefully a shared vision for how we can make the oral history program even more useful to both the Park District and the public in the years to come. Dr. Ortiz, bless her heart, started the program with the Bancroft Library Oral History Center at UC Berkeley. I was fortunate to be able to attend and graduate from their advanced oral history training program a couple of years ago. And as such, I have had an opportunity to take a look at some of the wonderful documents that have been produced by that program. There are about 60 oral histories in various stages of completion now in the archives. And I would like to encourage the district to expand the scope of the team working on that program to include volunteers. There has been a great deal of interest in making sure the finest professional practices are followed in developing that program, but that is not in any way antithetical to involving volunteers in the process. Many of the volunteers are persons with specific expertise in the parks that are being covered and in the specific areas that narrators have been debriefed on. For example, I had a chance to look at the oral history done in 2017 by our dear friend, the late Judy Bank. And as is, I think, typical of many narrators, she spoke about things like the Tevis Cup trail ride in the Sierras, but she never mentioned the Tevis Cup by name. She spoke about certain functions fulfilled in the parks, but she didn't identify the name of the specific person she was talking about. With greater involvement by volunteers, we can fill in those blanks and greatly improve the result. The best practices of oral history can be seen in one example on the oral history pages of the Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory. They have terrific videos of the folks who were involved in the Manhattan Project and their descendants, which is a good example of what our program could be in the future. As of now, there are these 60 oral histories that need to have some work, and then they should go out on the internet for the public to be able to read. It's a way of making Park District history a living thing instead of a dusty tome that's tucked away in the shelves. So I encourage the new supervisor of the archives supervisory piece of the oral history program to involve volunteers and trust that in the future, this will be an even more exciting resource for the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. That's a good point. I've done some of these myself, and I think it helps a lot if you know something about the person or their setting, because you know what questions to ask, follow-up questions in particular. So thank you. Did you hear that, Brian? Okay.
Yes, I did.
And then I have a couple of other comments myself. It seems to me that we created this position only yesterday, so I was shocked to see it was 7 years old. One of the things that we talked about especially with Beverly, once she became, took that position, was the importance of all of our history in addition to the Native peoples. And so I just want to make sure that whenever you talk to a prospective person, that they understand we're also talking about ranching history, mission history, industrial history. I mean, we do have a couple of brickyards, right? And so that's an important part to be considered along with the Native Americans. And then I wanted to also say that I think it would be important for whoever takes this position to make sure he or she spends some time with Beverly Ortiz, who is still around, and also Tracy Parent, who is most familiar with what the archives have in Black Diamond, and of course, things that are stored in the mine. We have things stored everywhere. But I think to be sure people talk to them would be really a good idea. You know, Tracy is continuing to complete some oral histories which never were completed. And she knows very well the challenges in doing that. And I'm pleased that she is doing it. So this, and I'll agree with the others, I think this is a reasonable place to have this position be within the planning, because I know much of the time was spent in planning. And I'm very happy to know that the cultural atlas has been much improved. And for people who wonder about it, it is a privileged document, so we don't show it to everybody, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, do you need anything else from the committee or any other comments from community members?
No, not at all. I appreciate your support, and absolutely, I know Beverly Ortiz is very interested in this position, and we did invite her to this meeting. I know she's in the middle of a move, but we talk regularly with her, and I think her input and Tracy's as well will be key as we move forward through recruitment and training and wherever this goes. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we do have some ranches that we need to be taken care of. The Roddy and the Errata, I mean remnants of the Errata. So I want to mention the ranches for sure. Okay, thank you very much. Then we'll move, and thank you for coming, Amelia. I'm glad we finally heard you. Okay, our second item then is tribal consultation for the park naming.
Thank you, Director Lane. Yes, this issue is important to us and as part of our ongoing conversations with tribal communities. One of the important things we talk about is naming and how to best honor the tribal histories within our parklands. So, and as you know, for quite a while, many months, we've been working on conversations with tribes around the naming specifically for Concord. And we did want to provide you an update today on those efforts to have those conversations and some of the input that we've been getting, but also to talk about cultural naming more broadly in our parklands. And I just want to be clear that the Concord naming is going to go through our normal approval process for names in accordance with our policy, that it will go to back to the board executive committee and then to the full board for the naming decision. So it's not our intention to have a Concord focused naming discussion here, but rather to just provide the Cultural Resources Committee members with updates on our conversations with the tribes, that information can then be folded into the larger conversation about the naming for Concord specifically. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian to give an introduction. Then I think Devon Reef will be giving the presentation.
Thank you.
That's correct. Thank you. I'm going to just give a brief introduction here. And again, we've got a quick little slideshow that I'm going to share with you here. So as mentioned, we wanted to bring this to the Natural and Cultural Resources Committee because we have for many months been working through consideration of various names for what has been referred to as the Concord Hills Regional Park. And we have heard a lot of interest in a culturally affiliated name. And there was a request from the executive committee for us to reach out to Native peoples to discuss culturally affiliated names. And I think you'll recall when we brought this forward, staff was hesitant to, despite the interest around a Native name, we were hesitant to recommend a Native name because they had not been involved in that process. That's not to say that we hadn't reached out and we hadn't attempted to have those conversations, but the names weren't recommended by Native people, and we had not yet been able to really have that discussion with them. So that's part of what we'll present here. But then we also, part of the reason why we, wanted to bring this to the Cultural Resources Committee was to actually provide a forum for Native people, if they were interested and available, to come and participate and to be able to share their perspectives with us directly in a forum. So we had discussed having a sort of separate public meeting, but thought the Cultural Resources Committee was a good place to have that. We did invite folks to participate. I don't see, and I haven't seen that any of them have joined us, and that's okay. We'll continue to have those conversations, but we did want to make sure that we provided the opportunity. So kind of how we approach naming in general, but also naming for this park in particular, is kind of looking at, I think, what falls within sort of three major buckets. What's the geographic name? And this is generally a historically known place name or a commonly accepted European place name. So for this area, that would be the Los Medanos Hills, and there's various opinions behind that name. And then also looking at just the historic features of a park. Major events associated with the park, eras associated with the park, or people associated with the property, whether they're former landowners or perhaps those who were instrumental in its preservation. And then there's the cultural names. So these are the native place names, or those that are more culturally affiliated. So we did present a number of the geographic and historic associated names. And so now we're continuing to explore the culturally affiliated names. So where we're at, we had a number of names suggested. We've used a number of strategies. We solicited input through our public workshops. We did solicit surveys, which got responses of over 1,500 or so responses. We have continually received individual suggestions from people who have recommendations on what the name should be. And then this is one more strategy to try to get input on this process. So we're very much still at this early stage. We've gone to the executive committee and the PAC before, but we're still very much early in that process. And the executive committee did request that we bring back for their discussion the results of our native outreach, and we will be doing that soon, and then going back to the Park Advisory Committee for their discussion, and then of course the final decision goes to the full board of directors. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Devon Reef, and he'll talk specifically about the naming efforts for Concord Hills Regional Park and some of the other considerations that have gone into it. But I did, just want to mention, we don't, there's other parks, there's other places that that we will be going through the naming discussion. So I think it's helpful for us to consider these are sort of some principles and strategies and considerations that we should have for naming any place after Native peoples. So with that, Devon, feel free.
Good afternoon, directors. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I'm Devon Reef, Principal Planner with the Park District. Thanks, Brian, for giving that important context to the presentation. As Christina mentioned, I'll be discussing the naming, we'll be discussing the naming of the new regional park in Concord with the Board Executive Committee and the Park Advisory Committee, but staff wanted to use this public forum at the Natural and Cultural Resources Committee to share some of the important lessons we've learned through the consultation with local tribal representatives for the naming of Concord. And these lessons, as Brian just mentioned, can be used in other consultations with tribal representatives in the future. Concord Hills has been the working name for the new regional park for many years. Over the years of park planning that's been going on, staff has sought the public's recommendations for a park name. And most recently, we coordinated 4 online surveys and had 1,200 responses of different names. And we were hearing consistently by some that the park should have a name that honors Native American heritage and culture. Staff got clear direction from the Executive Committee in May to start consultation with tribal representatives, which we had started to do, and to return with their naming recommendations. Staff is still conducting that consultation, and I'll describe that process in a moment. Next slide. To back up a moment and give the tribal context for the larger East Bay, until the 1770s, prior to Spanish contact, the Native American tribes spoke 3 different sets of languages, and that's what this map shows. What we now call Bay Miwok, Delta Yokuts, and several Ohlone languages, including Chochenyu. The red circle on this map shows approximately where the new regional park will be. Next slide. There were many Native American tribes in the area that we now know of as Alameda and Contra Costa County. But we also know that the Chupkan, who were a Bay Miwok people, lived in the area that we now know as Concord. And that's encircled on the map. Next slide. So to start the consultation process, we always start with an updated list of tribal representatives from the state's Native American Heritage Commission. We were fortunate that before she retired, Bev Ortiz, the district's cultural services coordinator, prepared a very thorough list of contacts of the federally recognized tribes, the non-federally recognized tribes, and other representatives from people who are descendants of Native people and their homelands here. There are 15 different tribes with cultural affiliations to Ohlone and Bay Miwok homelands in the 2 counties. I sent invitation letters to each representative, followed up with 2nd and 3rd emails and some phone calls. To date, staff is connected with 4 of the 15 representatives, and we're coordinating meetings with several others. Each were invited to participate in today's hearing and in the future adoption hearings for Concord. Next slide. Here are some of the principles that we've learned from speaking with Bev Ortiz and with the tribal representatives themselves. First, be inclusive. Contact all the East Bay tribal representatives and don't pick favorites unintentionally. Next, be respectful of people's time and the times that we are in. So in our case, we kept the discussion length to 1 hour, and we were flexible on when staff was available to participate in discussions and phone calls. If Native consultation is requested by the Park District, then it should be valued and respected. We heard that loud and clear from a tribal representative. Also, do not select Native heritage and names without tribal consultation. This is their culture, which they're sharing with us. And defer to the descendants of people with homelands closest to the park.
You're breaking up. We can't hear you.
Okay, let me speak slower then.
Okay.
Defer to the descendants of the people with the homelands closest to the park that is being named. So in this case, to the descendants of Bay Miwok people, as the Chupkan were the original people for the Concord area. Could you hear that? Okay.
We
I
could, Devon, but I think maybe you just want to turn off your video. I think you're just getting a little bit of a weak signal or something that's coming across. Maybe that'll help.
Good. That's a helpful idea. Thanks, Brian. So we can have the next slide. So here are two names which have been suggested in the dialogue so far with tribal representatives. Of course, it's up to the executive committee to recommend a name. So this is just informational at this time. One of the suggestions was Chupcon Territory Regional Park. As you can see from the history written here, the Chupcon were in this area for millennia until the Spanish contact and the mission system. The red circle shows on the map where Mount Diablo is, and it's hard to see, but the green circle shows where the future park will be. Next slide. Another suggestion was Chupcon Bay Miwok Regional Park. This name is both specific to the Chupcon people and more general to Bay Miwok heritage, recognizing the larger heritage that encompasses several tribes from the region. Next slide. So here's the work to come. Staff is going to compile all the leading names representing significant geographic, historical, and cultural input, as Brian was describing. Staff is going to report back on input from Native consultation to the executive committee. Staff is going to have discussions of various naming considerations with the executive committee and the PAC. And then finally, there'll be a name selected by the Park District Board of Directors. And with that, I'll close and I look forward to your discussion.
Okay, thank you. I guess my question is that in talking to the Native descendants that you did see or communicate with, did any of them react negatively to using the name Chupcon for the regional park?
No, that's a really important question. That was one of the things we wanted to know for sure was there a negative feeling towards a Native name in this location because of its long recent history with the Navy and the military. On the reverse, many representatives said that they welcome the chance to look at a history longer than the military history here, and that because it was well known that the Chupcon people were the homelands here, that was recognition of those people was important.
Okay.
And I'll just add, Director Lane, so we did have early on a number of conversations with Dr. Beverly Ortiz about different names and pros and cons of naming perhaps this property after Native people versus, say, another property. And as you know, Beverly was very diplomatic and sort of representing both sides and offering questions and sort of perspectives to consider. And one of the things that she said, well, maybe this isn't necessarily the most appropriate site because of the prevalence of the military infrastructure and the European footprint on the property, versus, say, another park like Deer Valley or some other place that's in more of a natural condition. What we heard back from some folks was that Native people, they're not just historic figures. They're still here, still thriving, still very much present in the Bay Area. Many of them have actually served in the military. And so the military history there on the property is still very much a part of Native American history. And so that wasn't necessarily seen as a negative, but actually perhaps as a positive to really talk about Native American history in more recent context as well as the historic context.
Okay, so Colin and Elizabeth, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First of all, thank you very much for doing the outreach. I think it's incredibly important, and I think it's important to take the time to continue to get the input from folks and really, as you put in your principles, to reach everyone. I know you've obviously made several attempts, but it'd be good to hear from as many of the 15 representatives as possible. So that's helpful. So that actually leads me to a related question. So what is do you have a timeline for the naming, or are we willing to just take the time to get whatever input is available from the Native folks in particular?
Well, our ambition was to wrap up the Native consultations basically in the next few weeks, and to bring something. The naming process, as you were seeing on that slide, has the executive committee, the park advisory committee, and then the board. We were hoping to start that process in July, but with the state of the world and people's attention being naturally drawn towards the health of their communities and just the changes going on in our society, I think we can be somewhat flexible and push things back maybe into August in an effort to reach out to as many of the tribal representatives as we can. But at the same time, as we start to hear maybe a consistent message, then that might lend itself towards bringing it closer. But the idea is this summer, we should be bringing the naming items to the committees and to the board.
That sounds good. I think that sounds like it's a good balance. I think it is important. I mean, we did just start the process of reaching out to the Native representatives in May, so it hasn't been that long. So I think to the extent that we can be a little bit patient in terms of really getting that feedback and being respectful of their process and other things that are going on in the community, I think that would be, to me, that's really important. So yeah, I think that's good. The other question that I had is, obviously this is also the place where there was just an incredible atrocity for African American people, and I know that there's the national site there and exhibits, and so when at the advisory committee, park advisory committee, when I was there, some people were talking a little bit about the national parks didn't want us to have a name that talked about that. And could you just speak to that a little bit? So, because I just wanted to understand better where we trying to move away from that. I really like the idea of having a native name if there's one that there's reasonable consensus amongst the people and it makes sense. But I was also sort of curious about, that little bit that I heard at the committee.
Yeah, I'll tackle that, and anybody else can feel free to jump in. And I'll say some of this is I've had a number of discussions with different folks about some of this, and then I've also got obviously my own personal opinions. So I will say have talked with Tom Leatherman, who's the local supervisor for the National Park Service, and his reaction was one, any incorporation of the sort of memorial title or Port Chicago title, we risk confusing our park with the national park site, and of course the national park site is inaccessible, and so we certainly don't want to create an alternative memorial or something that is sort of separate or detracts from the National Park Service site. Of course, we do fully intend to recognize Port Chicago and that story through our visitor center and through other sites. The other perspective that I've heard over the years is that the sort of idea that this would be, say, a Port Chicago memorial or something related to that, the memorial site, and it's really, if you haven't been out there, it's a really solemn place, is that that's the final resting place of the 300 or so men who died. That is the memorial. We don't want to do something that would take away from that, and certainly don't want to do anything that would take away from, say, the Army or the National Park Service's interest in expanding that site, because hey, there's already the East Bay Regional Park District has a separate Port Chicago Park or something like that. So that's part of it. And then I'll just share some of my own personal opinion, is that Port Chicago is a huge and important story. It's very much, was very much a catalyst for the civil rights movement. The work protests that happened was really one of the early examples of organized civil disobedience around a labor movement to fight for safe working conditions. So there's just so many social justice and equity stories that kind of come from the Port Chicago explosion. But looking at it from kind of a broader lens, that the history of that property didn't just start when the Navy took it over. I mean, this property to me really represents sort of just a history of occupation. So it was the Chupcon territory. And these were people who were there. Subsequent to that, it was taken over as a rancho. This property comprises the majority of what was Rancho Monte del Diablo. So that started the first sort of occupation on that property. It then went over to ranchers and dairy farmers who continued to occupy that property. And then the Navy came in and took that property from them. And established their base there. So there's a sort of broader theme of equity, and we've talked about this sort of swords to plowshares concept here, where we're taking what was a former military base and bringing it into public parkland, and that's a really powerful story. I think it's even more powerful when we start to talk about, this is the history that was before the Navy, before that explosion, and we really start talking about just themes of war and peace and restoration, and just the impact of just the land use on that site for hundreds of years and thousands of years.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very helpful.
A lot of cool stories. Colin, do you have something you want to say?
Sure. I just wanted to start by telling Brian that I really appreciate those thoughts and your comments, and they're very helpful and help me focus. I agree with what you were saying. Do we know of Native American activities on this site within the boundaries of this park? I know at Morgan Territory, we are very much aware of Native American activities and residences and utilization of those lands. Do we know anything similar like that?
We do. We do have some of the cultural resource reports that have sort of been developed through the consultation process as part of the Navy's conveyance of the property. So we do have a protected cultural resource site on our property, which is designated for no public access, and it's being treated as it is. Over on the city side of the property, and Beverly's familiar with this site, there are other resource sites in their area. I've heard it referred to as the Maltby Mound, and then there's been other finds over on that property. So we know there's been Native history on this property. And I'll relay to the best I can, and I'm not an interpreter, and I wish Eddie Willis or somebody is here who know this story better than I do, but there's the historic story of how Mount Diablo got its name, where the original, I believe they're Spanish, who misinterpreted the Monte del Diablo, the Rancho Monte del Diablo, as meaning Mount Diablo. whereas Monte del Diablo means thicket of the devil. So this is the area that that native folks were retreating from to go into the thicket of the devil as they were kind of coming down through these hills and down towards the bay. So so there is that that sort of native story about the misinterpretation of the Monte del Diablo name. So we do know some of their history. One thing that I've tried to dive into some is to what extent that we know that Native Americans served at Port Chicago or served on this base. And there's not a lot of records of that, or if those who died within the Port Chicago explosion had Native American history. But still researching that some, and I do know, right now the Native American Veterans Museum is also under construction in Washington D.C. So that sort of national effort to highlight the Native role in our military service as well.
Beverly, the only other thought I have is I would look forward to going through a similar process when we take up Clayton Ranch. I don't know what the status of Clayton Ranch is, and I don't know that the decision has been made whether it's going to be a separate regional park or part of Black Diamond, but it occurs to me that this would be a reasonable process to go through with that parkland as well.
Well, I think so too. And one of the things that Beverly Ortiz did was made this list of names that we have inside the park district, and which, including parks and trails and points, and how many are geographic, how many are native, how many are Spanish, how many are more recent than that. And so I think naming is always a very intriguing thing myself. And I am really pleased for us to be thinking about the Native peoples as a possible name for any of our parks where we have the naming process. I sat in on the PAC when they had the original discussion about the name. And I thought and also I sat in listening to the executive committee, and both of them, because we didn't have any response from the Native descendants yet on the possible Native name, were reluctant to select a name until we did have that response. So I think we're taking it at a nice pace, to do this. And I've been doing some historical writing while I'm stuck, or I'm staying in place. I'm not stuck in place.
Stuck in place.
And so the story of how Mount Diablo received its name, based on an incident not far from this, is really an interesting story. And so I've heard Eddie, tell the story before, and it had to do with a conflict between the mission soldiers and probably the Chupcan, and they named this thicket Monte del Diablo, and then all of these other excursions from France and Russia and Britain and America came in, and they moved that name to the mountain, and they said, oh, that's Mount Diablo, instead of the Indian name that it had. And Beverly Ortiz has done some wonderful writing on that too. So it makes for an intriguing story, I will say. So, originally I was hesitant. Well, originally I was pressing for us to adopt the land use plan and adopt the name at the same time, because sometimes I've seen us delay names and it becomes a big bureaucratic process to, for instance, change a name. Like A couple of us had discussions about not calling Crockett Hills Crockett Shoreline. And they didn't do that at the time of the land use plan. And then it became this very elaborate thing to finally change it to hills because it was not a shoreline and it was hills. So, but as far as I'm concerned, I think we're taking this at a pretty good pace, and it's close enough to the time we'll adopt the land use plan that I'm really very happy with the pace of this discussion. And I'm really pleased we are talking, taking the time to talk to descendants. So Christina, were you going to?
Yes, I just thank you to the board for your thoughtful comments, and just really want to appreciate Brian and Devon and their staff for all the good work that they've done on this. It does take some patience and persistence to make these conversations happen, and I really appreciate the work that they've done on that. And as Colin said, the conversations we've been having have helped me to focus and have really highlighted for me and helped me to see more clearly that this land really is a story of occupancy and a series of occupancies since the Chupcon people were there. And so some of the reason that the naming is challenging is which community of people that have experienced violence and injustice on this land do we most want to honor? And we want to honor them all. And so that's a challenge and a question for the board about how to best do that here, and where we might have other opportunities within the district, such as the Clayton land that Director Coffey mentioned. And in some ways, I feel that we're now restoring the land use to probably the closest that it has been since the Chupcon people were there, since over 90% of the land will be in a preserve. And it's to preserve, the natural resources, the cultural resources with minimal human interference of the land. So we look forward to the board continuing to have debates and to conversations about the naming. And I'm glad we were able to bring this information to you today.
Okay, thank you. Anything else people want to add, Colin?
Beverly, could I just take a moment to mention, apropos of this topic, later this afternoon, 4 to 5 o'clock, there's going to be a Zoom meeting hosted by Save Mount Diablo on the topic of working with indigenous communities and preserving cultural resources. And the presenters are our own Francis Mendoza and Kevin Dixon. You can get the details and sign up for this meeting at the Save Mount Diablo website.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, it's good to have our authorities there, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thanks for your presentations. And this is an informational item. And so if there are no other comments, we'll turn to item 3 on our agenda, which is the overview of our 2019 Integrated Pest Management Annual Report.
Thank you, Director Lane. This is our annual IPM report. Normally we're here in April, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are a bit delayed this year. We're happy to be able to bring this to you today. And the report will highlight that we have been able to continue with the board's direction on eliminating glyphosate. So we have not been using that product within our developed parklands, and we have increased the use of alternative methodologies. Not quite as much as we would have liked just due to the pandemic, but we are implementing those new technologies and methodologies, and I'm happy to report to you about that. The report will be provided by Becky Tudin, our Environmental Services Manager, and Pamela Bites, who was appointed late last year, I believe, as our new IPM specialist. So very happy to have them both. Also, our Chief of Stewardship, Matt Growell, is here to answer any questions, along with one of our operations chiefs, Steve Castile, to answer any questions from the operations side. So with that, I will hand it over to Becky Tudin. And I should just mention that the annual report itself is now on our website just as of today. So if anyone listening would like to go look at that, it is available on the website. And I believe it was emailed to the director shortly before the meeting as well. Becky?
Thank you, Christina. Good afternoon, members of the board. Becky Tudin, Environmental Services Manager. I'm really happy and pleased to be here to give this presentation about our 2019 accomplishments. We worked really hard on the IPM program this year, and I'm happy to be able to share it with you. I'm going to give a brief introduction of our IPM program and our fundamental approach, and highlight our accomplishments. And then, as Christina mentioned, we do have a final draft of our IPM report that was distributed to the committee members and is on our website. And I want to thank Public Affairs, Carol Johnson and Hillary Van Houston, who worked late into the night putting together this presentation. This is the second year in a row we've worked closely with Public Affairs to put together a report that's more accessible to the public about our program and also provides more transparency on what we're doing. And then after this introduction and overview, I will turn the presentation over to Pamela Bites, our IPM specialist. You may recall Casey Brierly. He had retired in 2019, and after a careful selection process, Pam was hired, but she had been acting well before that. And then also I want to take this opportunity, since we're so rarely in the same space, even virtually, to announce another hire in the IPM program. Kimberly Crispin, she was hired to fill a new position that the board created in 2020 to coordinate invasive plant control with the fuels management program. And she comes from Ardenwood and also worked in San Francisco. She was hired when we started Shelter in Place. So you probably haven't met her, but I'm hoping that we can introduce her in person sometime in the future. Next slide.
Becky,
Great.
before you go on, could I interrupt? I just wanted to clarify that Pam Bites was appointed, but she was actually selected.
Selected.
After a rigorous competitive process that we did an extensive search for professionals who could do this work for us. And Pam was selected in large part because she had not only the technical background on the use of our very limited use of chemicals and a way to apply those and use them most effectively, but also she had the stewardship background, that she really comes from a natural resources protection perspective. And we didn't find that anywhere else out in the field. So we're very happy to have Pam on board.
Thank you for reminding me of that. And to add to Pamela's kudos, she also worked a number of years in operations. And that was another big bonus of her work, is that she can really understand what park rangers do and how to integrate the efforts with them. I'm sorry, I'm feeling like my screen is going dark and light. I apologize. I'm not sure how to manage that. So what you see before you is the hierarchy of IPM tools. And as you can see, the foundation is the prevention of pests. We do this through cleaning our equipment so we're not spreading weeds or pathogens, or by actually initiating in the design less need for vegetation management issues, such as the new park picnic tables that don't have vegetation coming through. The largest tool we make use of in the district is called cultural. It's where you change the environment. And in that case, we do grazing. We have over 70,000 acres in the park district that we graze. And this not only provides fuels management, but it also increases the biodiversity of the grasslands and the area they graze. When we can't use grazing, recreational turf areas, picnic areas, fences, staging areas, we use something called mechanical or physical methods. That's mowing, flaming, torching. And this is the real bulk of what our rangers do and spend the majority of their time on. And if none of those methods are effective or can't be used, if the terrain is too steep, then we do look to chemical as a last resort. So this process, this selection and hierarchy is what we do each time we look to manage pests in the park district. Next slide. So when I was here a little over a year ago and giving the update for the 2018 report, the annual 2018 IPM report, The program was already emphasizing a reduction in glyphosate, and we highlighted last year a reduction of 67% district-wide of glyphosate. And in early 2019, we went ahead and gathered all the glyphosate from the disparate park offices. But as you know, in July 2019, the board passed a resolution to phase out glyphosate by the end of 2020 in all developed areas. And that marked a real turning point for our IPM program, and a number of big changes happened. We set into motion new trainings, a new process for requesting treatment, emphasis on an early treatment approach, and then a desire to track our hours on what we were spending on the different methods and the efficacy of those methods, so that we could use that to inform our future decisions and and supplement resources as needed. And that happened all the way from August to the beginning of 2020. And then, as we all know, the COVID pandemic hit. And that affected the staffing at parks. It decreased their ability to keep up with treatment and to keep record keeping of their treatments. But we hope to restart that moving forward as we adjust to these new COVID protocols and we get full staffing back online. Next slide. So now for the overview of our 2019 achievements. Our biggest highlight and our huge success, and really it's due to the board giving us very clear direction, was our success in reducing glyphosate. District-wide, we're now using 82% less glyphosate than we did in our 2016 baseline. And if you look just more closely at our fire ignition sources and our recreational safety, we're closer to 90% reduction. So we're on track to meet the board's resolution. How did we achieve this? Well, I want to say hats off to park operations. We coordinated very closely with IPM staff and park operations, Steve Castile, the unit managers, and with the help of Catherine Dudney, we rolled out a new approach. And since Casey had retired, all of his pest control prescriptions were void. So that was an opportunity for Pam to start at ground zero, work with park staff on mapping. We actually mapped a lot of their vegetation areas that they needed to manage on GIS. And then in doing so, we could discuss with them what were the options for treating that. Gave training to all the staff on this early preventative approach. And at the same time, since we had collected all the glyphosate, there was a very clear approval process before they were able to use that. It had to go through the IPM specialist, the unit manager, the chief, and myself before they were able to use it. And throughout all these trainings, we talked about the different methods and keeping a record of what they were using and what was effective, so that we had better information on where we were spending our time and how it was working. So given that new approach, we still managed to spend some time delivering projects focused on improving ecological function and public health and safety. The main public health focus was on controlling cyanobacteria, also called blue-green algae. And this was the second year in a row that we had no closures at Temescal due to harmful algal blooms. And that was in contrast to 3 years ago where we had up to 60 days. So that was a big success in that public health. For ecological enhancement, staff worked on controlling thistle, barbed goatgrass, and other noxious weeds. And shown here is a picture of a black skimmer chick on Leastern Island. And this is one of 2 islands that our IPM staff treat to eliminate the vegetation. And as you can see from the picture, it's necessary so that the nesting birds, the chicks, have the camouflage they need. And then the last area we really spent some time on in 2019 was on pathogen prevention. We did trainings of every single park unit and ranger on how they could prevent spread of weeds by cleaning their equipment, and also spread of pathogens. And we also worked with them to put together a booklet on how they could propagate plants from existing plants on site to avoid contamination or the introduction from outside nursery stock. So those are the big highlights of 2019, and very busy, very successful year. And now I'm going to turn it over to Pamela to go into the details of the program.
Thanks, Becky, and thanks, Christina. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, and I want to say congratulations, Pam, on your new responsibility.
Thank you. Thank you. Looking back on 2019, well, again, my name is Pamela Bites. I'm the IPM specialist. Looking back on 2019, it seems like ages ago, doesn't it? But we did actually have a very interesting year full of challenges and opportunities. 2019 gave us an opportunity to redefine and kind of refocus some of our IPM goals. Previously, we would collect data based on area of management. For instance, park maintenance, when park staff would use mechanical or chemical means, they can report that by area of management. Bare ground around fire pits, barbecues, parking lots, turf, fence lines, these are all classified as park maintenance. Likewise, roads and trails was another area of maintenance. Trail access, road and trail edges, those fire strips along those edges. But we wanted to redefine those or focus those by purpose. Why are we doing the vegetation management that we do? And so we took the two main goals that we find within the park maintenance and the roads of trails applications. And those are really fire safety, keeping the vegetation low in areas where there are high probability of ignitions. These are things like fire strips on the edges of roads and trails, bare ground applications around barbecues, fire pits, around the edges of structures and district residences. And then the other portion is safe and accessible recreation, making our recreation opportunities available to people through open trail access, landscaping and maintenance gardens, turf management, hazardous trees and fence lines. So as you can see, there's some crossover, right? We can see that in the previous versions of park maintenance and roads and trails, there were portions of fire safety and also portions of safe and accessible recreation, or recreation for short. So now we've refocused those and we'll be reporting based on these new goals by purpose, those of fire safety and safe and accessible recreation. All other categories remain the same, but we renamed a few to really show and highlight those purposes of management. These are our 5 top IPM goals. The first one is public health. These are things like harmful algal blooms when we spot treat for cyanobacteria or E. coli in some of our swimming areas, stinging insects like wasps or mosquitoes. These are all public health applications. Fire safety, as I mentioned earlier, for those high probability of ignition areas where recreation and vegetation overlap. Recreation, making it accessible and enjoyable to people. And then ecological function. These are things like resource projects that stewardship runs, along with the habitat enhancement or park level resource projects that park rangers typically are engaged in, as well as the larger restoration and mitigation projects that environmental programs runs. And then finally, healthy forests, which is our, what used to be called our fuels reduction program. This is the eucalyptus plantation thinning and brush thinning to create a nice shaded fuel break with a healthy understory and a healthy forest. Fall 2020 training will focus on our data collection and capturing our data and our use, both mechanical, cultural, and chemical, by these goals. But the big story, as Becky mentioned, is of course the glyphosate reduction. And this graph shows you from 2016, when we started to first introduce our proactive early season vegetation management programs to reduce the amount of glyphosate. We have achieved an 82% reduction over all district uses, but this graph does not include farm use. Looking more closely back to those 2 large areas of vegetation management, safe and accessible recreation and fire safety, we've actually reduced by 87%. And you can see in 2019 in green, that glyphosate use was really early on in the year prior to the board's resolution. And that focused not only on ecological health projects, but some of those fire strips along the road edges and rocked parking lots adjacent to staging areas. I'd like you to focus a little bit more closely on the monthly patterns of glyphosate use, because glyphosate was our broad spectrum, really effective, efficient vegetation management tool. So this really shows us the patterns of our vegetation management. So if you look through February through April and May, these were the months where we used the most herbicide. These are the times in the growth cycle of weeds where they bolt, they get big and have to be managed. Sometimes if the management happens too late, our rough mowing is often difficult to do because the weeds have gotten so big. So we have tended to rely on a reactive weed management program. Now we try to focus our attention on November and December. Early on in the cycle of weed growth, shortly after those first and second rains, when weed seeds just germinate, they are small and very vulnerable, and we can use safer products such as organic burn downs and also pre-emergents that use a very low rate. And we're much more successful, not only in reducing the amount of products that we use, but also we are more efficient and more effective. This is what that early proactive weed treatment looks like. This is the timing. It's pretty critical. It happens shortly after the first or second rains. And we are in the cotyledon stage with these broad leaves and these grasses here at Anthony Chabot Campground. This is an area where we want bare ground around a fire pit or a barbecue. So we combine that organic burn down herbicide, and it will burn down these small young plants, and they don't have enough roots in the ground to grow back. We combine that with that pre-emergent that will then will sink down into the soil and adhere to clay particles right at that margin where all of those young, those seeds are located. And when they germinate, they will encounter that product and the root radical will die and they will not emerge. So this is a really great 1-2 punch to deplete the seed bank in these areas where we want bare ground to keep our recreational users safe, both from fire and from nuisance weeds like thistles. We do train and communicate regularly with UC, A&R, and University of California researchers who work with a lot of organic growers in the Bay Area, Northern California. There are new technologies all the time and new products, and so we keep up to date with that, and we are constantly exploring new products as well. This just shows you over time that as glyphosate, our broad spectrum, efficient and effective tool, as our use goes down, our organic burn downs will go up because they do tend to be less effective. They require a higher rate, and if the timing isn't just right, they will require more applications to be successful. Triclopyr is one of our go-to products when we have to control resprouting woody vegetation and also broadleaf weeds. So this is a pie chart of our 2019 use, and you'll see that about 33% of the triclopyr or the Garlon products use was for our Healthy Forest program. 45% was for ecological function. We used about 20% of 2019's total for recreational uses. These are things specifically for poison oak. This is our go-to for poison oak. And this keeps many of our trails that run through nice, healthy patches of poison oak, keeps them open up and safe for the public to use and safe for our rangers to use. And then we also used a small amount for public health. This was interestingly also for poison oak, but it was in order to open up areas so that the Alameda County mosquito district could actually get in and use larvicide to treat for mosquitoes. So that was classified as public health. In our annual report, you'll see a big, beautiful table where we report all of our use, with the exception of farm, golf course, and structural. Those are all in separate tables in the same report. But this is everything within our parks by purpose or IPM goal and by applicator. So we strive to make sure that everything is reported. It's a big table, but I'll drive around it just for a quick minute. So when you have questions about what kind of herbicide use is happening in my park, you can go to that park. For instance, the top park here is Anthony Chabot. And under the IPM goal of healthy forests, we had both contractors and park staff apply herbicides to control the resprout of eucalyptus. Additionally, under ecological function category, IPM applicators, as well as the county ag department, treated noxious weeds along roads so that they would not spread throughout the campground. So that's how you read that table. Your IPM department is active in the water too. We are active with nutrient monitoring both in the upper watershed and in the water column in our lakes, both at Temescal and Anza. We are studying and keeping track of the nutrient loading that comes off of both of the legacy sediments that are trapped behind dams and also that are coming with anthropogenic and natural geologic finishing of the Temescal dredging feasibility study. We had success getting the Anza oxygenation system to break ground, and we have the oxygen system tank installed. And COVID slowed our total installation down. So we are waiting for fall to finish that installation. And then by next year, we should have an oxygenation system installed to help control cyanobacteria blooms at Lake Anza. We also published a paper with our intern extraordinaire, who is now getting his PhD at UC Santa Cruz on the nutrient sources and transport in Wildcat Creek. This gave us some great information on how to assist and guide the golf course superintendent on what products and where to apply their fertilizer regimes. Aquatic vegetation is poses a lot of unique challenges because we always use an integrated approach with mechanical, cultural, and chemical. But with aquatic vegetation, sometimes mechanical makes the problem worse. And we are limited with the chemical products that we can use that are safe in water. So this is always a fun challenge for us. We did continue with mechanical harvesting at Contra Loma of tules and cattails to open up the shoreline for fishing. We collaborate with the Contra Costa County Canal District on their research and trials on UV light treatments, and hopefully this may evolve in management problems. And then this year, I think we got really close. Hopefully we will have eradicated a parrot's feather infestation at Don Castro. Parrot's feather is a release, an aquarium release, and they can very quickly overcome the surface water of lakes, eat up that oxygen, and cause fish kills. Alternatives.
Pamela, I think you might be having some sound issues. Yeah, so if you turn off your camera, maybe you'll have better reception.
Perfect, thank you. Would you like me to go back or shall I continue?
No, we're good.
Okay, so maintaining safe and accessible turf in our recreational areas is a challenge given the abundance of source population of vertebrate pests like ground squirrels and gophers. But we are constantly looking at new technologies, and we were successful in trapping for ground squirrels at 2 parks, Ardenwood Farms and Contra Loma. We worked with a new contractor who was great and has the special touch, and we were very successful in 2019, and we hope to expand that where feasible. And also parks expanded their use of the carbon monoxide machine for gopher control. They really enjoy the efficacy and the efficiency of that machine. We spent a lot of time, as Becky mentioned, working collaboratively with other departments on pathogen prevention. This is an emerging and present threat to the diversity of our wildlands. So we continue with our Phytophthora working group formulating and using our resources to provide other options and pathways so that we don't introduce pathogens into our wildlands. We produce the field propagation guide so that park staff, rather than going to a nursery and picking up potential pathogens and planting them into the parklands, can actually use on-site vegetation that is appropriate both to the watershed genetically and as well is more likely to be clean. And we continue with our field testing of symptomatic plantings to find out exactly what the extent of some of the introductions have been. As the district's IPM policy states, preventing a potential pest problem is the district's best plan of action for the future. And we focus on prevention. Ecological function, our favorite category. We had a great third year of treatment of the perennial pepperweed at Point Pinole. This is in support of the recovery of the endangered softbird's beak. Perennial pepperweed is a big problem along our shorelines, has a deep root system, and is implicated in coastal erosion as well as the loss of biological diversity in these very critical areas. We began our program of riparian plant community restoration in Leona Canyon. This is an incredibly biologically diverse canyon, some beautiful natives in this urban oasis, but it is very quickly being smothered by Cape ivy, an invasive from South Africa. So we began that program, and this will be a multi-year project to support the biological diversity in Leona Canyon. We continue to fight for biological diversity in our grazing units and grasslands. We have a number of programs where we control noxious weeds like Medusa headgrass, barb goat grass, yellow star thistle, artichoke thistle, etc. These non-natives are plants that don't share resources equitably, and then they tend to lower the biological diversity. So this is a fabulous, 2019 was a fabulous bloom year here at the foothills of Mount Diablo in an area where we've been treating for barb goat grass for several years. We finished our 4th year of partnering with Earth Team, and we applied for, with the Regional Parks Foundation support, we applied for a CAL FIRE social equity grant and created an urban forest at Oyster Bay. We planted 330 trees with Earth Team teens from local high schools. These trees over their lifespan will provide substantial greenhouse gas emission reductions. It also provides wintering habitat for monarchs. Additionally, the kids and we planted a number of coastal sage scrub species that will flower during the winter, providing nectaring opportunities for overwintering monarchs. And you may have noticed by now that there's a theme in all of this, and that is ecological functioning is dependent on biological diversity. And biological diversity depends on social diversity. And social diversity depends on justice, equal treatment, and inclusion. And we believe in IPM wholeheartedly that our mission of conservation and recreation cannot succeed without equal or greater efforts towards social justice. And this is one of the programs that I am most proud of. We also continue to innovate in training. This 2019 was focused on the changes that we were facing, but we also partnered with California Invasive Plant Council in their Wildland Volunteer Network. We increased our BMP's training to incorporate the pathogens and other practices as we trained different units and departments throughout the district. We partnered again with CalIPSI and the Department of Pesticide Regulation to develop non-chemical methods, both best management practices that will be an online decision tool, but we also offered trainings. We have park visits, park site visits and trainings on a regular basis. We love our internships with our local university students, and we really enjoyed training and partnering with Civicor this year on an ecology and weed biology training suite. So moving forward, the IPM department will continue to refine and increase the efficacy of our organic herbicide arsenal. We continue to explore new techniques and products. ever expanding our training topics. We want to focus on diversity in ecological and social systems, as well as district culture. We have an IPM park plan template that we are refining, and we are looking forward to launching so that parks can develop their own IPM plans with help and guidance from stewardship. And we are looking forward to expanding our habitat enhancement projects and resource projects on a park level with other park staff. So I'd love to end with this slide. This is Celia Rodriguez, one of our UC Berkeley interns. She and Sarah Day did an amazing job backcountry mapping of artichoke thistle, as you can see here. And every day was a fun day with them. They had a great time. So I want to thank you for your support and your time. And we are here to answer any questions or receive any comments that you might have.
Thank you so much, Pam. Terrific presentation from Pam and Becky. Certainly lots of information. As you can see, there are many, many different aspects to our vegetation management and our IPM program. And really appreciate staff's good work. And also, again, just a shout out to operations and our field staff who make all of this possible, actually on the ground in the field. So with that, I'll turn it back to Director Lane and see if the board has any questions or comments on the presentation.
Well, I love all these outdoor pictures here. Wish we were there. Out of our 124,000 acres, how much is not built on? Is it like 120,000? So anybody ever done any kind of guesswork on that?
That is a great question. I don't know if Steve is still on the line, if he has any. Well, we may have to research that and get back to you. I know it's a huge portion of open space, but we'll have to get back. It's a great question.
I know some of it's lakes and some of it's buildings, and there's infrastructure, of course. But that does mean that your department gets to be in charge of a lot, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Elizabeth or Colin, do you have some comments or questions at this time?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, congratulations on a really fabulous year. It's great for me as a newcomer to see all of the wonderful things you're doing, and particularly the reduction in glyphosate is really important. So thank you. Thank you for that. And I wanted to also commend you on the way that you're tracking your time and methods on outcomes and then outcomes to make sure that what you're doing is effective, and trying to figure out the most effective tools and pesticides and ways to control, to keep our environment as natural as possible. So I really wanted to appreciate that, and also like the way you reframed some of the IPM goals to focus more specifically on fire prevention and safe and accessible recreation. I think, obviously the words we use for these things matter, and so that I thought was well done as well. So so those were my comments, but mostly I just really appreciate the great work you all are doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anything from you, Colin?
Sure. I want to echo the congratulations for the success with the reduction of glyphosate. I thought it would take longer than this. I'm very pleased that that's been accomplished to the extent it has. A question for Pamela was, I'm not quite sure what organic burn down is.
That's a great question, Director Coffey. Organic, when we talk about organic herbicides, it's a very large subject. So we want to be clear that the organic herbicide, all organic herbicides work in that they burn the foliage of the plant so that they desiccate and die. So industry refers to it as a burn down. There are also conventional products that are just burn down. They just kind of burn it down like an acid.
And Pam, if I could ask a clarification, as opposed, so that means that the chemical does not go to the root of the plant, but just is that correct?
That's correct. So when the when a chemical translocates to the roots, that's called systemic. So it would go systemic and kill from the root. So a burn down literally just kills whatever, hopefully kills or burns and desiccates whatever it touches. And then you hope that the plant dies after that injury. The smaller the plant, the more likely it will die. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. And Beverly, just a couple of comments. One, I think it's really cool that we're actually publishing research papers. Every time that I hear that this organization is doing that, along with all the university connections, college connections, the academic nature of this organization is really cool. I really enjoy that. And just finally, I spent a good deal of time out at Brioni's this weekend, and I wanted to congratulate who's ever responsible for getting rid of a lot of star thistle out there. I remember the last time I had been around I guess this is the northern western part of the park. It was seemingly like large sections of that park had been taken over by star thistle, and this weekend I didn't see it. So I'm very pleased with that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's good to hear.
Yeah, and I will add my congratulations too. And over the years, well, I'm looking forward to seeing the report as well. Over the years, we've had some reports that are kind of large and not for lay people, took a lot of time to try and understand them. And so I appreciate that the movement that we've been gradually doing and making them more understandable. It's an important part of what we do, and we have had criticisms by people who sometimes think we have 3 acres. Why aren't we taking care of it? So being able to communicate with our field staff is essential. And I appreciate all the trainings that you have been setting up and understanding their perspective as well. I wonder if Steve Castile, if you are there, if you would like to make any comments on the report and how our coordination is going in the field.
Yeah, so the way that I would kind of, phrase this, it's like turning a big ship. This was a huge undertaking to switch gears and, culturally switch the way that operations, along with stewardship's guidance, does everything in the district. Typically, as Pamela and Becky were saying, we would spray in the fall and, do the sprays basically at the very end of the season also with glyphosate and Roundup. So changing everything to doing the pre-emergence and the burn downs really did assist quite a bit. And it was a true partnership is the way that I would put that between stewardship and operations, in the fact that they got all of the staff through multiple training sessions up to speed on where they needed to be, put us in the right direction as far as where the board has directed us to go, because we heard you and wanted to follow the direction as best practices for the district moving forward in a timely manner, which made sense. And it's with your support and with stewardship support and the top management's also to get the equipment and everything that staff needed out there to make those changes of how we were able to kind of make that shift so quickly. So I can't say enough to stewardship. Thank you very much for all your help. And also to, management and the board for supporting this motion going forward.
Well, and apropos of Colin's comments, are we documenting in a way that might be helpful to other park agencies that are facing the same challenges? Writing this up.
Yeah, we're currently actually out there. Staff is taking photographs of for the applications for the pre-emergent and the burn downs.
Mm-hmm.
In certain locations where we did a pre-picture and then an after picture, so we're able to also document the efficacy. We did have a slight decrease in 2020 due to the COVID, but now we're picking it back up again, and the documentation is happening again because now we're able to continue with the practices. So yes, it is should be able to be useful information because it's actually what's happening in the field.
And then, our board resolution, I thought was pretty ambitious that let's get rid of Roundup by. Would you say we are going to have to make a little shift in what our end date can be in that? And if so, how are you communicating it?
So with that, that's still to be determined. We just got our staff back, and right now we're doing a lot of manual mowing and weeding and fuel abatement work, which kind of falls into the IPM practices. Those were areas where typically in the springtime we would be spraying. We just got a lot of the equipment that the board had authorized to purchase for the IPM controls in the field. So now we're actually going through the actual practices. Number one, we're seeing how the pre-emergence worked. Number two, we're putting the equipment to use. And three, we just got our staffing back with the COVID procedures. So I think that is still further information to come, but we should be rolling that out fairly quickly on when we'd be able to get that data together.
So are we able to do more mowing and less spraying next to all of our trails? I saw some work with a new truck on Iron Horse Trail about a month ago. And it did look like a new truck. So I thought it might be some of that new equipment we had approved.
Yeah.
Because and not on Iron Horse Trail, but some of the others, what I haven't really liked to see is as we walk into a trail and what you see on either side is yellow, the result of spraying as opposed to some mechanical approach. So I'm hoping that we will see more of the mechanical and less the residue of spraying myself.
Okay. Yeah, that's where we're heading towards. With the equipment, I know that it's already made huge progress within what staff is able to do now in relation to what we were productivity-wise and safety-wise from the past. So again, thank you for that, because it's made a huge difference in the field. And as staff gets used to using that new equipment in different ways, the primary was skid steers, and then the remote slope mowers. Those were just an incredible tool to have out there. People are really, really happy. The feedback from the field is just really incredible on what they're able to accomplish with the same amount of time.
Okay, and so I hope that in some setting you'll report that back to the board. And maybe at operations, maybe a special report to the board at some point this year on where we are. We bring this IPM report at some level to the board, don't we? What is the plan there?
We're bringing the full IPM report to the board.
Well, not necessarily. Well, we haven't necessarily done that in the past, but there's a lot of interest in Roundup, or lack of same, and so we might talk about a level of report at some point, and also sending a message to the board members who are not on this committee to let them know that the IPM report is available, exactly where it's available, or you might send it to everybody. You said you were sending it to the three of us, right?
Yes, I send it to the committee members only. Yes,
Okay.
I can forward it.
might be a good idea to send it to the whole board.
Okay.
Then they can have their very own to read through.
Thank you, Director Lane. We will certainly do that. I'm wondering, Pam, could you stop sharing your screen so we can more easily see each other? Although that's a great picture. Yes, I will talk with Steve and Jim from operations about the best timing to bring a report to the full board, an update. We want to get further through the season so we have more information.
Yeah, I don't know about the timing, but just to be sure and let us be informed about it.
I know that we intended to bring the information back. It's just a matter of right now, we're just getting everybody back on board. And then we're taking a look at right now going through the fire season for, you know, the abatements, things like that. So that's when we gather the more information once we get all that together and come up with our target dates on, did we make the dates? Did we not make the dates? And that's still to come. But as we gather that information, we'll definitely be, you know, bringing that forward.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Great. I also wanted to pass along from Deputy General Manager Alvarez that she arrived late to this meeting and then had to leave early for another one. But I know this topic and all of these topics are very important to her. So she just wanted to pass along her appreciation to staff and the board for their support of these issues.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much for this report. I always look forward to it, and it is June instead of May. So we got to it. I appreciate it. Okay. So next, do we have any public comments of people wanting to talk generally?
Director Lane, we do not have any public comments on this item.
Oh, wait, Meadow is raising her hand.
Okay, we see another
process clarification. Are we asking for public comments on this item or public comments on items not on the agenda?
Oh, I just realized the item is not on the agenda, but it could be on this or other things.
Yeah, so I think first we were going to have comments. This is Matt Grawl, Chief of Stewardship here. So I think there are no comments on the IPM annual report, but we did have we have two public comments for items. One item on the agenda, and that's Meadow is here to comment on the first item on the cultural services reorganization. Meadow did join the meeting in time for that item, but since we changed the order, she missed that item. So I thought now would be the time for Meadow to comment on the first item. And then there was another comment submitted by email that's a general comment to the committee that is not about anything on the agenda. So Heather would read that into the record after Meadow makes her comment. So those are the two comments we have left today.
Okay, well, welcome, Meadow.
Hi, sorry to make it so confusing. My name is Meadow Darcy, and I am now the Chief Steward of AFSCME Local 2428. And I wanted to comment on item number 3, which was the reorganization of the cultural resources. I actually missed the presentation because the change in the order. So I'm not quite sure how it was presented, but I did want to let the board know that we just were notified of this or just got the documentation yesterday on this reorganization. And our MOU does state that we're supposed to have it 21 days prior to the board meeting. So I just really wanted to express our frustration with having items on an agenda that we're not always aware of. It was mentioned, I believe, the day before yesterday with a meeting with HR, a brief meeting with HR where they mentioned it, but we just got notified this morning that it was that they just found out it was on the agenda today. So we just wanted to let the board know that this item, we have not had a chance to review it. I know it's not a recommendation item, it's an information only, but it is still required to come to us 21 days before. So I really just wanted to make that comment.
All right, thank you. We were getting informed about it. We're not making a decision. Thank you, Meadow. Okay, then we have a general public comment that Heather, you're going to read, or is somebody here?
Correct. We have received one comment submitted via email for items not on the agenda, and I will read it into the record right now.
Okay.
Dear Recording Secretary and Board of Director Wards, The purpose of this letter is to offer Norman LaForce my support for his candidacy for the position of Director of the East Bay Regional Park District, Ward 1. Mr. LaForce has always been a strong advocate for the protection of our shoreline in the East Bay and along the SF Pacific Coast. He co-chaired tax revenues and helped create fire protection plans for many park districts. In addition, he has been leading the Sierra Club efforts to acquire and create progressive projects that can benefit everyone, not just corporate behaved magnates. With Norman LaForce as Director of the East Bay Regional Park District, Ward 1, our natural resources, lands, flora, and fauna will be well managed and preserved. We can no longer stay silent or adopt politics of laissez-faire in regards of the devastating trends of financialization of our public lands. Norman will fight against corporate greed and rich individuals who think public lands are for grab. As Director of the East Bay Regional Park District, Ward 1, Norman will protect our public lands and prevent that some of our state and federal officials treat those lands as forms of financial asset. With the overwhelming evidence of rapid climate change, we cannot wait any longer to take progressive measures in the defense of public lands. The candidate who will faithfully and without bias support and defend EBRPD is Norman LaForce. Cordially, Alex Mouzet.
All right, so cultural and natural resources. Okay.
I don't think that was intended for this committee. I think that was just a general email that was sent to all of us. It did list, I was just looking because I couldn't figure out why we were reading this. It does list the Natural Resources Committee in the, among the people it was intended to. I think just generally, this isn't a criticism of doing this. I think we err on the side of reading almost anything, unfortunately. But we should be careful about communications that are, in this case, I think purely political and having to deal with political campaigns. We've already made that appointment. So I think there should be some vetting of these communications to see if there may be a reason that they're inappropriate for consumption. Right now we're just in-house. This is a family here as I look at the name. So it's just a concern I would have.
Well, Director Coffey, I remind you, we are still broadcasting on YouTube, so the public can certainly listen and participate. Christina, I think, was going to say something, but I think this is challenging for staff because when we put out the call for public comments in this meeting, and we do have a general public comment section on this committee, and that address is how people can submit general comments. And this comment came in within the time period to submit comments to the committee. So I think that's something we do need to address in this remote environment, though, how we manage these comments and things like that when people are just submitting anything under the general comments. So,
well, we get quite a variety of public.
Yeah, I think that this was just confusing just because it got sent just to the email. We saw it sent to all the directors, but it went to the email address that receives comments, public comments for this committee.
I saw that. I just think this person erred, probably.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true, and that's why I pointed.
I think we assumed as much, but when checking with district council, since it was submitted in the time frame, just to err on the side of caution, we thought this would.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. And
but
I'm good.
It's a work in progress, I think, as we address these new formats of how we're taking in comments and then conveying them out to the public in this remote environment.
Yeah, but when we are having an actual meeting, people do come in and talk about things that are not necessarily relate, to the topic of the meeting, and there were a couple of things there where they talked about natural resources, I guess. So, Elizabeth?
Well, I was just going to echo some of the thoughts that certainly when we're in doubt, we want to err on the side of hearing any comment or opinion that comes in. I don't know enough about the process to know if there's some type of restriction on things that are not specifically before the committee or board. I guess probably not. But so I agree with the staff call to, well, when in doubt, read the opinion, read the comment.
Christina?
Thank you, directors. Appreciate all your comments, and that is exactly the analysis that we went through quickly because we received the comment about an hour before the meeting and did talk with district council. And we do have a section in this meeting, as Matt mentioned, that is for public comments for items not on the agenda. So people can comment on whatever they want to comment on. We are going to look further into the question about purely political campaign comments and what the restrictions are on that under the Brown Act, because that's not necessarily the intention of the public comment period. So, but given the short time frame and to just err on the side of caution, we decided to go ahead and read it into the record for the reasons that you've already identified. Thanks.
Okay, well, you know, we're for free speech here, so. Okay, so no other public comments. And we did on the agenda point out the various ways that people can send us comments. So, all right. Then we have board comments.
Yeah.
Board-
And I just, Matt Grawl again, I just remind the committee, our next scheduled meeting is September the 9th. So that will be our next scheduled meeting. We did miss a meeting, I think goes without saying, earlier this year during COVID. We wanted to keep this one and get back on schedule. So just want to remind you of that.
Okay, isn't that when we celebrate statehood? September 9th? Maybe it's the 8th. We can have a celebration. You see what I'm doing on suffrage now. Okay, so now thank you for that, and we'll talk, we'll go to board comments. So are there any board comments, anything that you want to add to future agendas?
No, I want to say appreciate the effort made by staff on all of these topics today. It was a very good meeting, and I know a lot of work goes into it. And I think, Beverly, your cat's hungry.
No, she just wants attention.
Oh, it's free
okay.
speech.
Yeah, in my own household, yes. Oh, okay, all right. Elizabeth, did you have any comment?
Well, I just want to express my appreciation for the staff. Really an excellent meeting today, very informative, and really excited about being on this committee because these are areas that I'm extremely passionate about preserving our natural environment, and I think you're doing a great job, and I look forward to continuing to contribute.
Okay, thank you. And I will add that as well. Do you want to say what we will be looking at? We have in September, and then we are going to have our stewardship. Do you think we will have our stewardship seminar in the fall?
You know, that's a great question, Director Lane. We haven't started thinking about that just with things happening now. As you're asking me the question, I'm starting to think that we're going to need to do it using this format and maybe doing a stewardship seminar with some form of social distancing and likely on an online format. Typically, we would do that in October, November. Maybe things will have changed a little bit by then, but I think it's something we're going to need to start really thinking about and planning for. So, I mean, and that's one reason, Director Eccles, we separate these meetings in September and December, because usually we have a stewardship seminar for the public during the month of November. So we often space the meetings a little bit in the fall to accommodate that full day seminar. But we haven't quite contemplated how we'll host it this year. So I think that's something we're going to need to start thinking about. As far as the next meeting of this committee, the two stewardship topics we were planning to bring was one on monarch habitat restoration and to talk about the history of monitoring of monarchs at Point Pinole. They're not doing very well in the district, but we did receive a grant recently that was just approved by the board, or to receive the money, but we got money from the Wildlife Conservation Board to do a project at Point Pinole. So we're going to be thinning eucalyptus to enhance habitat for monarch butterflies there. So we'll be giving an overview of that project and our planning process around that and stewardship. And then we're also going to be talking about some additional funding we just got from Caltrans to build a shorebird island at Martin Luther King Regional Shoreline. So we're going to give you an update on the current island that's there and then talk about our plans for building a much larger island in the next couple years. So those are the two stewardship topics I was thinking about bringing, and I'm not sure about the planning topics at this moment. Christina, I don't know if you have any thoughts on planning or other items.
I see that Brian has left. No, I don't think we do have that planned yet for a cultural and planning item, but we will certainly have something on the agenda. And if the board members have suggestions that you'd like to convey to us, we're happy to hear that.
Okay. All right, Colin.
I don't have it in front of me, but I remember during the course of last year, we actually came up with a list of topics. We spent some time going around the room and coming up with some topics. And so there is in existence somewhere. I have it. I have to dig down and find it. There's a list that we have of topics that the committee members were interested in
Yes.
hearing. Just urge you to go back and look at that sometime.
Yeah, I did. I mean, and those two topics I mentioned are on that list.
Sure.
But we will, maybe through email, send it out to all the committee members and Christina and just to refresh our memories heading into the next meeting about what all those topics are as they plan towards the end of the year. Some of those same things will be highlighted at the stewardship seminar, but since it has been a few months since we've talked about that in a public forum, and we put that together, gosh, the end of last year. So we will share that, circulate that through the committee, and we can discuss it publicly at the next meeting.
That'd be terrific.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for the reports and for your attendance, your comments, and this meeting is adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.